Hi, everyone. This is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception Action Podcast again, back with another article review. Today, I want to look at an article addressing a really interesting topic of what are the consequences of trying to acquire a new motor skill when you have pain, right? You have pain related to a sports injury or something like that. There's been a fair amount of previous research on this topic with kind of mixed results, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about the method that people have used in a second. But some results, experiments have shown that pain tends to be associated with kind of no effect on motor learning. So people have the same performance after training with pain versus without. While others have actually shown evidence of somewhat of a benefit, right? That people actually learn better with pain. Some people have argued that maybe they're more focused on the task when they have pain. Some of this also seems to depend on the localization of the pain and how it relates to the task. So those are kind of some of the background. In general, though, I would think, there are some serious problems with trying to acquire a new motor skill with pain and reasons that we might not want to do this. The first one is, of course, pain is very, very likely to induce an internal focus of attention on your body, right? When you have this very strong stimulus that you want to attend to, that's on your body, according to your body, that in general, we know that's not good for motor learning. And related to this, I have this study I published a few years ago where I looked at people post-op of surgery on elbow surgery and knee surgery, baseball players. In my study, they did not have any pain, but they still had lingering kind of focus on the injured body part. So in some kind of pilot studies I've done where people have pain, I've found this affects even stronger, right? So in general, any kind of stimulus like that you would think would not be optimal for motor learning. There's also evidence, right, that pain tends to reduce movement variability. In the episode 324, I talked about movement variability in terms of injury, how it relates to injury, and I talked about a study where they looked at runners who had patellar and had knee pain, runner's knee, and they found that they had less variability in their running movements as compared to pain-free runners. And they actually showed with an intervention that increased variability, you get less pain. So it's possible people suffering from pain are going to have less variability, which could be detrimental for a few ways. It might decrease the chance they're going to find an optimal solution by exploring. It also, decreased variability in that episode I discussed. It increases the chance of re-injury. If you're going to move in the exact same way all the time, your chances of re-injuring you would think would be higher. And finally, just pain itself kind of creates an attractor or if you will, a constraint, either way you can look at it, that is really not optimal. So you're trying to organize your movement around it's an individual organismic constraint that's not really related to performance. So I cannot, if necessary, you could do it, just like you can organize around the fact that you have short arms, right, and so on. But you would think overall, this generally is not going to lead to the most optimal solution if it can be avoided. So I think there's lots of reasons, obviously, we should try to avoid learning a new skill until after we were pain free, right? If we can. But this is obviously a question we can look at in research, and this is a study that just came out by Area and colleagues in the journal Research in Sports Medicine, and they were nice enough to send me a copy of the paper so I could review it here. So what they did in the study was they looked at the effect of pain on learning dart throwing. Okay, so they had a very simple dart task where you had to hit the bullseye. They measured the error. They had 30 males split into 3 groups, right? The DART task, in terms of the instruction, they were given kind of very traditional, here's the correct way to throw a dart, given verbal instructions, and then demonstration from someone that's kind of skilled at it. Interestingly before I read this, I've never heard of people doing this. It sounds kind of bizarre, but maybe interesting. What they used to induce pain was capsaicin gel, which is capsaicin, the chemical in red peppers, right? That makes them hot. And as most people know, if you get it in your eye or anything, it causes pain, and it also causes the sensation of spiciness when you eat it. So what they did with this gel was they applied it. So they had 3 groups. A local pain group, they applied it to the elbow they were actually throwing the dart with. So it's localized around the task is the basic idea. Then they had a remote pain group where they applied it to their knee. So something nothing to do with the task itself. And then they had a control group that just learned the task without any pain gel. And what they did was they had people self-rate pain on what's called a visual analog scale, where 10 is unbearable. And what they did was they adjusted the application, how much they applied, to keep people at around the level 7. And there's data in the paper showing this. I'm not going to show it, but so that's pretty intense pain, right? It's pretty high level of pain associated with it. It's not just a minor irritation. And I should say, I've done a long time ago when I was in grad school, I participated in some experiments where we looked at kind of painful stimulus. And what we used to do back then was use a cold compress on your head, right? So it kind of freeze. It was very uncomfortable. So there's a variety of different ways that you can do it. The setup of the experiment looked like this. So they had pre-test without pain, right? Then they split into the 3 groups. They did 10 blocks of 15 trials. So throwing the dart, a total of 150. 2 of the groups are going to have the painful stimulus. One of the control groups not. Then they did a post training retention test 1 hour later, 24 hours later, and then 1 week later. Importantly, in all of those, there was no pain, right? The stimulus was taken away and they had time to recover. Okay, so that's the very straightforward design. And what they're going to measure, I didn't mention they had a motion tracking system on the performer. They measured a bunch of joint angles in their arm, elbow, shoulder, wrist, etc. And they also looked at movement variability. So that's kind of going to be the most interesting data from the study. So what did they find? The first thing they found was when they looked at performance, right, the actual accuracy of the dart throw, there was no significant effect, group differences. All groups improved, right? You can see they're about 70 score to 90 or so after training, right? So that the 1 hour retention test, and they kind of held their performance 1 week later. And you could see there's no real significant group differences, right? There's some evidence that looking like the local pain is doing the worst, right? The squares, which is maybe what you would expect, right? But it was not significant. So there seems like, in general, the pain did not impair the learning of the dart throwing task in this, although there's some evidence that there might be an effect there. In terms of movement variability, what they found was there was a significant group difference. So this is data showing coordination variability, which they measured using a vector coding method. I'm not going to go into, but what you can see is in this, for the control group, the black circles, they what you'd probably expect with this task. So it's important to note this task, right? You're throwing from the same distance to the same spot all the time. So the variability of the constraints is very low, right? So what we would expect in terms of expertise, what we find, you would expect as you practice, your variability of movement is going to go down. It's not going to go down to 0, right? You still need some movement variability, but it's going to decrease. And that's what you see with the black circles. The control group went from about 10 degrees, and this is the shoulder and elbow, down to about 5. Here's where you see the group difference. You do get a significant reduction in variability in the pain groups, but it's not nearly as much as in the control group. So in the end, they have much higher movement variability. And the same is true of this is another joint. This is measuring the wrist, I believe. And what you can see is kind of the same pattern, a little bit less extreme. You're getting this reduction with practice in the control group, and this overall higher variability with the pain groups. There's something a little bit, this part in this graph, there's something a little bit problematic. This is something is very tricky to deal with in motor learning studies. If you see, there's a pre-test difference in movement variability, right? Pre-test, they're all no pain. So you wouldn't expect this difference. And this difference is what's there. So I'm not sure what you can, if you can associate this with actually being due to pain or the fact that their groups are different. But you don't, if I go back a second, you didn't see that here. This is what you really hope for when you do a motor learning study. All the groups are the same at pretest, and then the differences show up. So it does seem like there are some differences in movement variability going on, right? So overall, the authors concluded kind of generally that what they find is that people with a painful stimulus, can still do the task, but they're essentially reorganizing their degrees of freedom differently, right? They're doing different joint angles, and they have some other data in the paper that kind of aligns with this. So they're, you might say their performers are self-organizing around the pain, right? So the pain is a new constraint, a new organismic constraint, and they're just self-organizing to be able to perform the task successfully around this. And they make some claims, about rehab and how we can work with pain. And, and I think obviously with rehab, we need to start doing things when people have some pain, but whether we want to learn a completely new skill is kind of a different question than just trying to get different range of motion and things like that. Some of the things that come to me and when I look at this study kind of in limitations or areas for future research, as I mentioned, one of the things about this task is it's very low constraints, right? Everything's the same in the task. The only thing that might be changing, but even that, they kind of is fatigue. What would happen if we changed the constraints? We did a more complex task where you have to adapt your movement solution to different constraints. Would people be able to do that, right, when they have pain? You would think, I would predict they would be less able to do that, right? Because you're taking the pain is kind of taking away solutions. It's right. It's obviously getting people to organize differently, and they're not organizing in the same way. So it's not likely that they. I don't think they'll be able to have as many options for adapting. Also, it would be great to be able to see, you saw that high amount of variability still in the pain group. It'd be good to know, is this, split this, do something like an uncontrolled manifold analysis. Is this good variability or bad variability we're seeing? And also a limitation. It's interesting to me that you got this kind of difference in coordination and organization, despite the fact that, I don't know, maybe it was the case. I've never tried this myself, but it seems like this manipulation of putting the gel on your elbow is going to make the pain very kind of not movement specific, right? So usually when you have pain, right, when you're recovering from elbow injury, it's going to hurt more when you do a certain movement than when you do a different movement, when you rotate inward versus outwards, or flexion versus extension, right? I don't think that would be the case with this gel on it, right? So that's a very different type of stimulus to organize around, right? So though it was local, it's still not very specific to certain movement solutions, right? So I think there's still a lot of important questions to address, right? I think overall, I would say if it can be avoided, you don't want to have someone trying to learn a new skill when they have pain, right? It's like I said, it's creating a detractor that cannot be in any way help you find an optimal solution. You might be able to work around it. But in terms of getting people to just start moving again and not learn anything new, that's a very different story. But overall, I think this was an interesting study. It was very well done, and I think this is a very interesting area to explore. So that's it for today. This article review. Again, I just wanted to mention, if you find these useful and you want to help support it, I would greatly appreciate it. To keep me the stuff I need to do these. I greatly appreciate it. You can go to my Patreon site, and there's various different levels where you can get bonus materials all the way up to one-on-one consulting with me. So thanks for joining me, and cheers for now.